And now, it's the moment you've all been waiting for, the Drunken Tyromancy Show. And then we have it, little effect there. It switches across to the side and you can see where I'll be sitting in a moment when I can be bothered going over there. The man on the TV is being interviewed by Andrei Martyanov, who is a wonderful man, and very, very good to listen to. And anyway, let's go around to the front camera. Oh, hang on. Sorry. Oh. There we go. Ah, yeah. All right. I'll be there soon. Hold on. Hold on. Okay. So I can get stuck into this now. Righty. So feeling good. Hi everyone, this is not a full episode. I'm not really ready yet. I spent yet another 24 or more hours trying, I've tried every possible combination of cables and every possible combination of settings, probably several times each. And for some reason, I suspect there's actually like a few different issues going on here with all this audio equipment. Part of it being that nobody in any documentation ever defines like the kind of underlying generic mechanics of how everything works from every perspective, so that it doesn't matter what you set up. If it's possible, you will know how to adapt it to what you're doing. And instead you kind of have to hunt around trying to find people who are trying to do something similar to what you're doing, close enough, and like try it their way, which won't work. And then try it one of the other guys' ways, and that won't work either. Probably works for them just fine, but like nobody's doing what you're doing, and nobody's providing a tutorial for what you're doing. So you just sort of try to adapt, and you change every single friggin' setting a million times until eventually you get something that kind of works, and then it breaks, and then you start from scratch. So that's what my last many hours has been up to. And 1 second, I'm just going to grab my coffee again. Today, it is the caffeinated Tyromancy show, but I will ensure that I get something boozy to drink because I think it's worthy of that. What I wanted to do with this little segment is to do a bit of a commentary, and I have in front of me here, which I'm not going to sort of just read it verbatim, I'm just going to use it as notes to talk to you about, but I listen to like a lot of other people's work, and Andrei Martyanov, for example, brilliant. If you don't know who he is, check out Smoothie X12 on YouTube. He is ex-Soviet military but lives in Florida, I think in the USA. He loves the USA, doesn't like what has become, fair enough, but also loves Russia as well, and he's a great guy, very knowledgeable on military matters. So he's interesting to listen to. But one of the other ones that I listen to a lot is, I know she has another channel that I cannot remember the name of it, but she has one on YouTube called Through the Eyes Of. First name's Ania. I believe she's Polish, although she has spent like a lot of time in Russia, and she did an interview, what was it, yesterday morning, my time? I'm not sure when that was her time. Or maybe it was actually from a day before that, her time, and I'd just taken a long time to get to that episode. But she was interviewing Scott Ritter, who you might know. Scott was a UN weapons inspector, and before that he was a Marine, I think, in the US Army, or he might have done like a bunch of other things in between. And he gave an extremely candid, I mean, he's always pretty candid, but he gave an extremely candid interview with her. So, I mean, I've recorded this as being March 1st, but I don't know whether that was March 1st their time. I think they may have both been in Russia at the time, I'm not sure. But anyway, so I was listening to what they said, and I just sort of thought I would do a little recording as a commentary about some of the points that Scott made, because like he's kind of one of these people where sometimes he says stuff and I love him for saying it, another time I'm thinking like, Scott, come on, you know better than that. So I just wanted to make those commentaries. So what do we got here? Okay, first thing he said, which was particularly relevant for Ania because, you know, of her being Polish, but he basically harped on for a little while, intentionally harping on, and for good point, to really hammer home the point, he was basically saying over and over again in various different ways, we don't care about you. The USA will not lose. Nobody in the USA, the rich, the poor, nobody's going to lose a single night's sleep over how many Polish people die fighting Russia in Ukraine. So he was basically trying to make the point of, like, for God's sakes, rise up against your government and stop them from contributing to this bullshit, because the USA is just using you the same way that they're using the Ukrainians as a battering ram, and they don't give a shit how many of you die. Like, they could not care less. They will not bat an eyelid over it. They will not lose a moment's sleep. And one of the things that he did during that little kind of diatribe was, like, where he was pointing out how in the USA there was, like, a lot of Polish jokes where the Polish people were the butt of the joke, and they were always depicted in those jokes as being stupid. So it's kind of like, here you are sucking up to us when we just disrespect you to your faces for generations. And now we're offering you up as the next sacrificial, cannon fodder to Russia because we want to disempower them, and we don't care how many people we kill to do it, because it's got nothing to do with your benefit. It's got to do with our benefit. Screw you. So he was being like that honest about the US's policy of proxy wars and what it all means. But then he kind of, for my liking, he really kind of shat all over it a little bit when he then brought up a point about he was recounting a story. Well, actually, there's two things that he said that I wasn't terribly keen on. One of them was where somebody else kind of was mentioning to him in his anecdotal tale about how Zionism was sort of, historically systemic, or something to that effect, to which he just quickly kind of palmed it off as like, whatever, as if that wasn't important, or as if it could be brushed off because, well, we don't actually know if that's true or not, or, something to that effect. Now, I wouldn't have thought he would have any kind of contrary beliefs given his position, but he does admit that he used to be quite pro-Israel, and he spent some time, sort of with Israelis, and so he was sort of biased by that in the past, but now he sort of started to, and he openly admits that he's sort of, had his eyes open and kind of realizes what a murderous regime they are. But at the same time, you can hear in that language where he hasn't sort of gotten everything out of the vernacular yet. But anyway, yeah, it was just like that dismissal. I kind of, like the whole whatever thing. I thought, no. Like, Zionism is historically systemic, or whatever, was said. It was something, along those lines. And I thought, yeah, like, don't just brush that off. That's one of the most important things in the entire discussion. Anyways, the next bit was where he was mentioning about how some of the examples of where the Israelis are particularly cruel. And one of them was an example of, I think, like a sniper basically shooting a surgeon in the head or something like that while operating on a woman or a child or something like that. So, he's trying to save somebody's life, and some, dickhead sniper takes him out. Now, that's all fine. I totally agree with any criticism you want to lay at the feet of Israel. I probably, will not disagree. In fact, I would like to hear us all stop using the word Israel at all, and instead just to refer to it as Israeli-occupied Palestine, because that's the fact, right? It's Palestine. There's no such thing as Israel. It was set up against international law, based upon land theft, genocide, and utterly unnecessary, because in the 1940s, prior to these Europeans being imposed on the region and then their murder sprees back then, essentially there were Christians, Muslims, and Jews living very, very peacefully in this secular country, side by side, not a problem. So what was the need for a Jewish state? And if you think about the US's hypocrisy on this matter, where the whole concept of separation of church and state is supposed to be, and Scott brings this up again later when he talks about separation of church and state, but this is supposed to be fundamental, right? And it should arguably be fundamental for any state, is that whatever your religious beliefs might be, they are not useful in the field of politics. They are rife with opportunities for corruption of the political sphere, because if your only justification for claiming something to be true is supernatural knowledge, then you don't have a justification, You know, it's really that simple. Now, nobody's sort of saying like, you know, hey, don't believe, if it makes you feel good, fine, just don't bring it into politics. And this kind of reminds me in another way as well of the situation in Russia where, like, you know, they have banned the LGBTQI kind of movement. And a lot of people sort of criticize the Russians of saying like, oh, like, see that they're anti-gays sort of thing, like they're picking on the gay people. And it's like, well, I don't think that they're so much picking on the gay people. I mean, they, like, if you look at the Chechens, they probably do pick on the gay people, but you know, it's like that's their culture anyway, that they don't want gay people. They're very manly. But I think with Russia, it would be more accurate to say that the whole thing about what they banned wasn't an attempt to ban the impossible. Like, you can't ban anybody from loving whoever the hell they want to love. I mean, that's not going to work. But what they were really focusing on, I think, and maybe there was like a miscommunication or maybe it was just misreported, I think that the bigger focus for them was banning the idea that the LGBTQI plus blah, blah, blah movement was a valid basis for a political movement. Because again, just like religion, what the hell has your sexual preference got to do with the political needs of the country in the global sphere? It's like, fine, just do what you want, just keep it to yourself. Nobody else wants to know about it. It's like, geez, do I come like telling you every bloody day, you know, when I masturbate, you know, who I had sex with, you know, who I fantasized about? No, I don't. I certainly don't go out parading it on the streets. It's like, it's supposed to be a private thing for a lot of people, and the whole, you know, LGBTQ thingy just rams it down people's throats. And I think the other factor in there as well of like why it actually makes sense to ban it as a political movement is because, typically speaking, and I mean, I say this as somebody like, you know, I have gay relatives, you know, so it's like I mean them no harm, certainly. And I've had other friends and housemates and stuff in the past who were gay or bisexual or whatever. And honestly, I didn't give a shit. It wasn't personally my bag, you know, I wasn't into it, but it was like, if somebody else is going to be, why am I going to give them a hard time? It's none of my bloody business. So when I looked at this whole thing, I sort of thought, well, the people that I've met, as lovely as some of them are, they all have some kind of emotional scarring, right? Now, I've heard tons of them claim, no, I was just like this at birth. I was always this way. But then when you get talking to them after a while, you sort of realize, yeah, no, you weren't. And you just admitted it. This happened to you. That happened to you. That happened to you, right? And I don't know if I mean, maybe there are some contrary cases, but in the vast majority of cases of people I ever spoke to, I could find something, even if it wasn't an admission openly, I could see it in them easily when they started to talk. So anyways, that's sort of a separate matter. But the thing about the whole Israeli-Palestine thing that got me was because, you know, and I know I diverged a lot there, but I tend to do that. At around 52 minutes into the interview where Ania is talking to Scott, he recounted the story of the Israelis targeting the Palestinians, the story about the surgeon getting killed, or, you know, however it went. But then he likened that to, he said something along the lines of comparing it to a bunch of US Marines at a checkpoint in Iraq where a car bomb previously went off, now faced with a new car. They don't know if it contains, you know, a bomb or a man with his pregnant wife and kids. And they basically kill the family because the car doesn't stop. And Scott says, that happened. That's tragic. That's horrible. And here I have to stop you, Scott. No, that's palming it off way too easily. What the fuck was the USA doing in Iraq? You had no business being there, and there is no justification. Any civilian you kill under any circumstances is you in a country where you shouldn't have been killing people you shouldn't have been killing. It's that fucking simple. And I just don't see how we can have a conversation where it's okay for some people to be in a foreign country murdering people, but it's not okay for others. It's like what you're doing is you're actually validating the idea that it is okay for the Israelis, because it was okay for the USA. And the Israelis can say, but hang on a minute, you said it was okay for you to kill those like Iraqis, like at a checkpoint. You know, what were you doing there? See, it's fine for us too. You've just given them every excuse that they could possibly need. So you can't do that. You have to equally criticize the USA, because every single war they've ever done has been on foreign soil, basically interfering with other countries. And that's just the overt stuff. What about all the covert stuff, all the assassinations, the regime change, the color revolution things? It's like it's endless. So yeah, I kind of had that bit of a difference with Scott there, is that I just, and I mean, I kind of know where he's coming from, but at the same time, it's like he sort of misses the point sometimes of, and I mean, I know that he has admitted, I've heard him literally say in some interviews where Scott will say, listen, I'm just a dumb Marine, and I thought, I couldn't help but thinking, yeah, Scott, but I'd have a beer with the guy, because it's like, he's a decent guy, I'm sure. It's just that, like, he maybe sometimes speaks with too much enthusiasm before thinking about the full depth of what he's about to say and what it really implies. And I think he missed those ones. But I'm pretty sure as well that if he was to, for some reason, watch this thing, even though this is my second thing I'm making, and so far as I know, I still have an audience of 0, I would hope that, he might sort of say, okay, yeah, Trev, you got me there, fair point. Anyway. So look, the USA doesn't get a free pass. The next thing... So there was actually a third thing that I had to disagree with him about, which is where basically, and I've heard a lot of people say this, so Scott's not the only one guilty of this, but where Scott says that, so I write down his actual words here. Hold on one second. So he said about conspiracies that he's not inclined to believe conspiracies because they would require a lot of very smart people and not getting caught. And to which I say, so what? Big deal. That's not a challenge. And let me justify this. So now, there's a possibility there that Scott was being disingenuous in this. I don't know. I hope not. But otherwise, he's being very, very naive. And my favourite saying, which you can quote me on, this is one of mine, this is a Tyromancy-ism, I guess, is that anyone who thinks no two people ever conspired is called naive. Seriously, even the most fleeting glance at the history books would tell you, like the history of commerce, politics, and military affairs tells you that conspiracy is as commonplace as breathing. It is literally taught in their schools. And I'm sure Scott is quite familiar with ex-CIA Director Mike Pompeo's open admission, we lied, we cheated, we stole, and in which speech he openly discusses the fact that they did have entire training courses on such things. So does that not count as conspiracy? They are conspiring to lie, to cheat, to steal. The arms and armaments companies are conspiring to create wars through which they can sell vast amounts of arms. And if we look back in history, I mean, there's plenty of examples. There was one that I heard from my father, and if there's any history buffs out there, I'm sure you'll probably know the one I'm talking about. I can't remember the names of the people involved, but there was a British Navy admiral or general or something like this. I mean, I don't know the military titles. But this guy was tasked, or one of his tasks was to find out how to control the islander nations, the people that live in, Samoa, Fiji, Hawaii, all those places. And he basically reported back to the Crown of England with his report saying, these islander people, they can make their food, they can make soap, they can make rope and housing and clothing and build fires and everything from the coconut palm. They create medicines from the coconut palm. Everything they need, they can get from the coconut palm. In order to control these people, we must destroy the coconut palm. And this is quite serious. This is a letter that was written back to the Crown of England, whereupon afterwards the decision was made, okay, go around and destroy as many coconut palms as you can. And the British went around, their navy, chopping down coconut palms by the tens of millions. It was a program that went on for quite a long time, but effectively the idea was to starve out the native people of the islands to make them subservient to the Crown of England. Now, what is that? It's a conspiracy. It's people conspiring for an agenda. The whole concept that conspiracy theories are somehow unbelievable is itself stupid, but it's not surprising given that it's the brainchild of the CIA. And and which they openly admit as well. And if you want to like find that, I'm sure it's not too hard. I mean, I remember seeing that like where James Corbett in his podcast had actually, he put the documents there from an FOI investigation. So it's literally published on the CIA website where they're openly admitting such things. So that's the facts, is that conspiracies are all over the place. There is nothing remotely absurd or unbelievable or anything about it, excepting the fact that a lot of people are very, very brainwashed. And on that subject of brainwashing, an interesting point came to mind a while ago, which is that through our media, I think, especially in the movies, one of the reasons why people struggle to believe that they too are brainwashed is because what does that mean to us? And if you think about what it means to us, well, you probably went to a Marvel movie about the Winter Soldier where he's like, he doesn't know what he's doing. And so Westerners have been programmed by movies to believe that that's what brainwashing is. They're saying, no, look, I'm in control of myself, It's like I'm not sort of thing, like going around, how could I be brainwashed? I'm perfectly normal. And what they don't realize is like, see, that's not what brainwashing is. Brainwashing is where they get you to accept flawed and faulty reasoning and logic as a way of convincing you of completely fraudulent facts, which are not facts at all, but complete bullshit, or at least a misrepresentation of the truth that is so far out of context and so far out of whack that it doesn't really even resemble the truth anymore. But in order to get you to believe that stuff, they have to get you to believe and to think in terms of these faulty logical constructs. An example of this would be circular reasoning or circular logic, where effectively you begin with an unstated and unfounded assumption. So you are stating something and asserting it as truth without any evidence at all to call it truth. Like you have no idea if it's true or false. You probably don't even know how to tell if it's true or false. So here you've got this assertion and your conclusions are based upon that. But because you asserted it as true, you therefore assume that your conclusions are true, and your conclusions have a little feedback loop that sort of says, well, see, if my conclusions are true, therefore my premise was true as well. And this little circular loop sort of goes on, and you see, it's flawless. No, that's a demonstration of flawed logic. You can't do that. It's like if you want to begin with something as a premise or an assumption, you could use an unfounded assumption where you didn't have evidence to prove it if, and probably only if, or similar things, if what you're then discussing is a hypothetical scenario where you are coming to a hypothetical conclusion. So you're not claiming the conclusion to be definite and genuine in the real world, but hypothetical in a proposed reality in which the assumptions are true and in which version of reality those assumptions would lead to that thing. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen. It just means that if those things were true, then this would be true. And that's fine, because that's a perfectly good way of arguing a point, because you're actually admitting the fact that the conclusion is uncertain and you're not claiming it as a certainty. You're just sort of trying to use logic and assumptions to get to possible conclusions, because now you can narrow down the set of all possible conclusions and you can start to compare them and contrast them and do other research to find out, is any of these things true, or are they all wrong and maybe something else completely different is true. Anyways, so conspiracies, it's an interesting thing. And to hear someone like Scott say that he doesn't believe in conspiracies, he prefers to, and I mean, like, I know the thing, like he said, he prefers to believe in incompetence, and I'm sure that's true as well, but let's not get into the false dichotomy of thinking that it has to be one or the other. Maybe it's both. Maybe, yeah, sure, there's incompetence, there's also plain stupidity, there's insanity, and there's conspiracy. There is always conspiracy, because there are global multi-trillion-dollar industries. I mean, the arms industry is global multi-trillion-dollar. The pharmaceutical industry is global multi-trillion-dollar. The banking industry is global multi-trillion-dollar. Do you really think that people wouldn't kill and murder for a share of that? Of course they would. Now, not everybody, me and you maybe, no, of course not. I mean, I don't need to be a dickhead that bad. It's like I'm pretty happy not being one. But, some people are just that shallow and narcissistic and fucked in the head. So anyways, I don't know if I'm going to get banned for this kind of language, but, you know, I kind of don't care. It's this for me is catharsis, and I am going to try to find out wherever I can place those little warnings that sort of say, yes, this content is not for children. I don't know how to do it on every platform yet, so if you're listening from the platform and you're about to ban me, hey, just give me a chance and point me to that button. I'll happily click it. Yes, this is not for kids. Anyways, so yeah, so I wish people would just wake up to this idea that to not believe in conspiracies is the definition of naive. Now, right, what else did I have here? Oh, okay, yeah, and okay, so on the same subject. So one of the other points that he made to try to justify this idea that conspiracies wouldn't be real was to suggest that, you know, well, you've got to fool so many people, you've got to not get caught, and you've got to be really smart to fool them. It's like, no, you don't. We've had intergenerational brainwashing going back a long bloody time. So much so that I've witnessed falsehoods taught to otherwise intelligent and well-educated people at reputable universities in science classes. So it's like, you know, you can fool smart people too. And when you have this intergenerational brainwashing, you have people who are making their decisions and thinking their thoughts on the basis of at least some subset of all of what they think of as their knowledge is total bullshit. But they're basing decisions things. It's like that circular reasoning thing. Well, I presume this stuff is all true because I believe it. Well, what if it's not? Then the decisions you're making based upon that, the thoughts you're having based upon that are in some way flawed. The other bit as well, of course, is that I think there was a recent open admission of something that I'd heard since I was a child because of my father's involvement in the health profession, which was looking into the effects of fluoride and chloramination and other things in drinking water. And it has a massive detrimental effect. But there was an open admission recently about the brain damage component. So here you have an intergenerationally brainwashed community with a mainstream media owned by very powerful people who lie and lie and lie and lie and lie. And then you have poisoning of people causing brain damage. And not just the fluoride in the drinking water. There is lead that used to be in all of the fuel and lead paint and everything else. There are so many things that can contribute to brain damage. And when you think about that, the people in power don't need to be that smart anymore. You know, remember, they inherited a system developed by people long gone, right? They didn't even add to it. They just paid for other people to add to it. Often, perhaps people who didn't even know what it was they were really adding to. So, there were smarter people who were just like employees who did some job to evolve this system of control, which these rich, people inherited. And so did that take some skill on their part to inherit it? No. Was it an achievement on their part to be randomly born into that family to inherit it? No. Was it an achievement on their part to be born and trained to be a dick, and at no point in their life did they ever wake up to the fact that, hang on a minute, I've just been trained to be a dick. Wow, what a dick move. So they're not that bright. They don't need to be that bright. They just need to have inherited a system of control and to be dumb enough that they never wake up to the idea of, hang on a minute, I'm making the very world that I live in a worse place even for myself. So no matter how much money I have, there will be less good stuff to buy and less good experiences to have because me and all these other dickheads, a group that is growing in power and size, have been destroying all the things that we are actually here in life to enjoy. I have lots of these things in my bank account, but all I can do with it is to be a bigger dickhead. That's not winning. It's not. It really, really isn't. You must have very, very low standards indeed. Anyway, so we have brainwashing people making, sort of all this sort of, conspiracy stuff quite easy, really. Not to mention, of course, the fact that people are averse to looking silly. And so for many, many years, just calling it conspiracy theory was all the CIA had to do. All they had to do was make people feel embarrassed, and that was it. They were just afraid of how they would look in front of everybody else. Well, grow the fuck up. Anyway, so the other point there as well is that nor indeed is it actually true that they have to not get caught, because the reality is they own the courts as well. I mean, has anybody of these conspirators actually gone to jail? Is Tony Blair in jail? Is George Bush in jail? Is Obama, the smiling assassin, is he in jail? You know, because think about it, right? Nobody ever cared whether the POTUS was, a smiling assassin or an orange-haired buffoon. They just want the bombs to stop. You know, it doesn't matter whether you speak nicely, just stop dropping bombs on us. That's all those people care about, is just stop killing us. Stop starving us. Let us live. You know, so, these people in power, they don't have to worry about not getting caught. They get busted all the time. They've been exposed, everything else. What do? They put Assange in jail, you know? And now, like, there's tons of us out there. I mean, like, how many people have you now seen all over every platform talking about it? And these people are still roaming free. Does it matter if we mention it anymore? They know we know. We know they know we know. It's like, what's the point hiding it? They don't have to get caught. You know, they own the cops too, I'm sure. Or at least some of them, anyway. Who's in jail? Assange. What did he do? He exposed conspiracy. And in doing so, he revealed the systemic nature of conspiracy. And then they proved it further by applying it to persecuting him. So we know that, you know, you'd have to be naive to believe that conspiracies don't happen. And hence, a little note to myself there about, like, you know, I'm just a dumb Marine. It's like, no, Scott, look, you're smarter than that. I know you are. So just take the time to think a little bit before you make such comments, because I know that you know this stuff. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, mate. Anyway. When he later started talking about how people at Council of Foreign Relations, oh yes, that was actually a really good bit too. He was quite open about his offer to join the Council of Foreign Relations. So where, yeah, he basically said, like, everybody there is owned. And that was kind of funny too, because if he's just gotten over describing how he doesn't believe in just conspiracies. Well, hang on a minute, you just said that everybody at the Council of Foreign Relations is owned. Is that not a conspiracy? You know, you literally just told us about your personal experience of a massive conspiracy, you know. So, yeah, so you do believe in conspiracies. In fact, you've witnessed them, Scott. Now, Christianity. Here's the other one too. Now, I'm also, not so much into any religion. My position on religion and philosophy goes like this. It's like, philosophy is that study of mind. It's the study of ideas. It's the study of knowledge itself. It's that raw thing from which we get logic, which specialized becomes mathematics, which in certain constructs becomes modeling. And when you specialize those models, they become sciences. And when you apply those sciences, they become engineering, right? This pathway all comes out of philosophy. So philosophy, very, very, very useful stuff. It is not about, like, gazing at your navel necessarily and staring up in the clouds and wondering whether or not you can find another joint in your bag. It's, you know, philosophy, well, I mean, you know, it's probably that too, you know, for some philosophers, but, you know, philosophy really is about this study of mind, and through it we've learned a great many things, and particularly of use are those things that talk to us about how logical constructs can firstly prove themselves in some cases. And this is something that I do want to do an enormous body of work on, is the idea of axioms, which are a self-evidence or self-proving truth. That's I won't go down that track on this video because I'll be divergent for ages. But anyway, yeah, so with Christianity, I kind of I look at, like, religion in general as being, you know, the plagiarism and bastardization of the history, literature, and philosophy of other cultures, wrapped in, like, a matrix of abhorrent, archaic beliefs and just invented BS, which is usually for the point of view of, like, control. So religion is, always was, and ever will be the psychological warfare arm of governments against both domestic and foreign conquered civilians. And I'm not suggesting that there aren't nice things in there, but what I'm saying is that most of the actually worthy things were plagiarized from some prior philosophical basis, and then they got branded within the religion. So take, for example, the words of Jesus saying, "Do unto others." Well, like the Greek, they came up with that at least 1,000 years before the purported time of Christ, right? So I doubt they were the originators of the idea too, because the Chinese were probably like another 1,000+ years ahead of them, So it's a fairly basic idea, do unto others, because what is that describing? It's describing not being a hypocrite, It's like we could really look at like a lot of law in the world as being easily tested for its logical validity by simply comparing it to the principle of hypocrisy. If we apply hypocrisy to this thing, does it validate or invalidate this legal argument? If it's hypocritical, then it's invalid. And one way I word that often is to say that, if the shoe were on the other foot and somebody was doing to you what 5 minutes ago you did to them, you wouldn't just be arguing against what they're doing to you, you'd be arguing against the exact same logic you used to justify it when you were the one doing it. So if something is hypocritical, it has no valid foundation, and hence the occupation of Palestine. And many other things as well, which I will get into over time. But yeah, so look, if you want to be a Muslim, if you want to be a Christian, if you want to be a Jew, if you want to be a Buddhist, whatever, fine, do it. Just don't ram your beliefs down anybody else's throat. It's like, it's this whole thing of separation of church and state. I think there needs to be separation of church and society in general. It's like if you want to join a little club of people where you all sort of pray together, fine. But the moment you start forcing that on other people because you're all absolutely convinced that you couldn't possibly be wrong, let me tell you, that's a pretty arrogant way to be, especially when, from the people I've met who believe that kind of thing, not one of them could ever tell me anything about logic and philosophy and how you tell fact from fiction with what kind of logical constructs and how one would define that sort of thing. They haven't got a clue. So they just believe something because they do, because they were brainwashed into it, because they've always believed it, because it feels good or it rings true or whatever pathetic excuse they've got. None of these things are reasons. Now, again, that's fine if you're keeping it to yourself. It's fine if that's what you want out of life, go for it. Like, I'm not going to stop you. I just don't want people pushing that stuff on me, all right? Because I grew up, like many other people did, discovering as a young child that people wanted to push various things onto me, and nobody ever asked me if it was okay with me, and I rejected it at a very young age, and I'm glad I did. So, on which subject as well, religion in general, when you look at something like Taoism, I do not consider Taoism to be a religion. I think that anybody who has interpreted Taoism as a religion didn't understand it. And it's a beautiful piece of philosophy it is. It is brilliant as well. Not surprising it came out of China, because when you think about the age of the abacus, right? And you look at the claims of where mathematical principles were invented, and then you think, but hang on a minute, the abacus proves that by the time this first one anybody ever found, which is unlikely to be the first one ever made, because it's actually in a fairly perfected form, therefore there were probably much earlier prototypes. But by the time this one was made, it shows that the Chinese understood, not just counting, but they understood arithmetic, right? So how long did that take to develop? I think it easily pushes the discovery of a lot of mathematical principles back a lot further, and most likely in ancient China. Now, look at the land of China, very, very mountainous. We know that they had like a lot of temples and stuff up in the mountains where there would be various kind of, orders of monks and stuff who would meditate and think, and they would observe nature and so forth, and they had thriving commerce. So it's quite a natural conclusion to think that what is more likely, that they just magically, instantaneously came up with the abacus and arithmetic at the same time? Or did they come up with arithmetic and then it took them a little while to figure out how to make this thing and how to perfect it, which would actually do the job for them faster than whatever other previous methods? And those previous methods had their path of evolution as people were discovering those things. And these things take like a long time. So it's highly likely that that's the case. Taoism itself demonstrates that the ancient Taoists actually understood the mathematical principle of the multiplication of sines, not being as in like sine from trigonometry versus, cosine, but the law of sines in terms of a positive positive or a negative negative, both resulting in a positive, or a positive negative or negative positive, both resulting in a negative. That principle is demonstrated in the way that the hexagrams of the I Ching are drawn. So they had a grasp of that mathematical principle back when the whole thing of the I Ching was developed. And that's a hell of a long time ago. So for which reasons, and various others, and perhaps I can do a further video on this at the later stage, and I'll just add one more thought to this as well. I highly recommend, having a read of some stuff from sort of Taoist thinking. But the other big one was that if you read the texts properly, you will actually see words translated into English as heaven and God. What these words actually are is not a religious belief in a supernatural God being, nor a religious belief in a supernatural heavenly place. What they are is philosophical placeholders for discussion and debate and rumination, right? So if you want to be discussing the concept of this archetypal, idealized being, that would be God, right? So that means that the unknown and the unknowable can be placed into a conversation and discussed without ever actually knowing what it is. But you just use it as a placeholder for that thing and talk around it, hopefully, hoping to get out of it some new piece of knowledge. Similar thing with heaven. What we're talking about here is the archetypal, idealized place, group, event, or other thing that can be, experienced, that can be thought of as heaven or heavenly. Right? So again, it's just a placeholder. So in discussion, in debate, you now have these concepts of God and heaven as archetypes for debate and thinking. That is what went into these things, and it's very, very obvious. Like, it takes you a while to see it, but if you kind of read it and keep reading it and keep reading it and rereading it, you will eventually kind of see how these people thought. And it really is brilliant. It abides by a great many principles of more modern day logic that came out of Kant and Hegel and the rest of those guys. It's really quite congruent with principles discovered in quantum physics. But not because there's any kind of, mystical, supernatural thing going on. There's not. I would describe it more so in terms of set theory in mathematics, and in terms of the concept of something undefined in a particular set. So basically all that the word supernatural means, and this is where Westerners go wrong because they don't get this, whereas the Taoists got this. All that supernatural means really is just an object or an element of an object which is undefined in the domain in which you exist. Now, that does not mean that it's not defined in a higher domain. For example, complex numbers. Now, each complex number has a real component, but it also has the imaginary component. So any complex number exists in a 2D plane, but any real number or number from any real number, because they're all real numbers, even if they're part of also a subset, but any real number exists in a one-dimensional line, so they can't see that second dimensional component. It is supernatural to them, right, if they were little beings on that number line. But from the perspective of a 2D complex number, perfectly normal. He's thinking, what are you looking at me for? So I'm just Joe from the pub, So that's another thing that I saw in the understanding of the Taoists, that they kind of get this concept. But anyways, so I kind of veered a lot off track there on many occasions. I don't know how long I've been talking for, but I do know that these platforms have limits, and I'm still practicing, so I need to kind of do as many videos as I can, and hopefully I'm getting the audio levels right. I have kind of listened it back many times in various combinations, but if anybody out there is hearing any of the audio that I do and you think that it's kind of like too loud or rattling or whatever, please let me know. I think I've kind of got about as good as I can, but I'll try to tweak it a little bit further if there is a specific problem anybody's having which can't be resolved on your own end. So I just wanted to say all that, and I guess while I'm here, I'll sign off by saying hello, Ania, love your work. Hello, Scott. Thanks for being the subject of my critique, and like I totally mean it I'm sure you know, like I mean it in the best possible way. You know, you're a good dude, and I sort of enjoy watching your interviews with all the various people who you go on their shows. Anyways, so hope everybody is going to have a great, what is it today? So I don't even know what day it is. What is it? It's Saturday. Oh, Jesus Christ, it's the weekend. I had no idea. So if you can support this project of mine, as you can see, I'm just piecing it together. I'm just figuring things out a bit at a time. I'm going to try to do as much as I can. Have a look. You should still see it. The pinned posts on Locals. There's an accompanying one on Substack. The article, the text one, has the links of everything. But at the moment, I'm just going to be using primarily on Locals into Rumble. I can't live stream into Rumble yet because I have to get more followers. And besides which, I haven't even done a practice run with live streaming, so I'm not sure what I'm doing yet. I kind of got a rough idea of the principles, and I don't know whether it's going to change my setup and screw everything up and cause me another huge headache. So Locals, Rumble, I am pretty sure Rumble is automatically posting through for me to Facebook. And while I mentioned in the earlier welcome video that I didn't want to put everything onto Facebook, I think maybe with this early stuff I will, so it'll just all come through, because I'm not going to kind of expect people to sort of suddenly be donating money to, you know, some random guy, you know. I mean, I hope you do, but like I kind of like figure like I need to sort of build up some content so that when people come along and see this project, there's a little bit of stuff for them to go through, and that buys me time to make the next stuff and the next stuff, and to get more familiar with the equipment. And I hope at some stage, through your support, I'll be able to get a better quality camera, and I won't be talking into a big blue and black penis. I did this just because I noticed that the wind coming out of my mouth was doing that kind of thing, and I hope that didn't do it to your ears, sorry. But I didn't have one of those professional windsock things, so I'm just instead using it, you know, this. It's not at all sexual, is it? But yeah, like, I mean, I've done the best with what I've got. It kind of doesn't work for everything that I want to do yet. Like, for example, I could do an interview, but both me and the other person are going to hear echoes back. And at the moment, I've tried it a million different ways, and it's just not working. So, yeah, that's the other bit too, is that if anybody is an audio engineer and you really, really get this stuff and you've got a good heart and can help, please do. In the meantime, I'm just going to keep screwing around with it until I figure it out. So thank you all. Thank you one and all. And I bid you good night.